stop motioned to me. I didn't recognize her, and all I remember about her now is that she was wearing a bright yellow coat. She wanted me to read what someone had written on the back of the bench inside the bus stop shelter. Right there for all to see. If you go out there now, it's probably still there. This is what it says. I think, the writer wrote, that Jesus would prefer that we use our time helping those who are less fortunate, rather than wasting it in church. I read it out loud and looked at the woman. She said to me, I just wanted you to see that. Now, I should have asked her why she wanted me to see it, but my mind was moving, and I have to confess to you, my brothers and sisters, that what I really wanted to do was to take a pen and write, no, not cross it out, right underneath it, why not do both? Just say it. By the way, the author had said just say it at the end of that particular message. But knowing my luck, Fairlawn's finest would have come by. And your pastor would have been arrested for defacing public property. Then again, that would not have necessarily been bad publicity, because I would have been able to explain what I meant. So I'll explain it to you. I thought about it later. I thought to myself, what would cause someone sitting in a bus stop to use really such perfect grammar, other than the just saying, to convey a message like that while sitting in the shadow of two churches? Was that person perhaps someone in need of the help that he or she was saying that Jesus would have us offer? Had that person come to our doors and found them locked? Or maybe that individual had a family member who was suffering in some way. And what about the woman in the yellow coat? Why did she want me to read it? Did she know that I'm the pastor? I wasn't wearing anything on that particular day that would indicate that I am the pastor. Did she disagree with what was written there? Or maybe she agreed with it and also wanted some sort of assistance in the midst of her own suffering. You see, here's the deal. I can't totally argue with the person who wrote that message. I think that Jesus would have us spend our time helping those who are less fortunate. And indeed, such action is very important for people, particularly those under the age of 40, who have no connection with the church, or perhaps have had some connection, but for some reason have become disenfranchised. But here's the deal. Where is it that people hear about the call of Jesus to service? Where is it that we are inspired and empowered to help others? Where do we find other like-minded people to join us in such ventures? is done by people who have sat in places like this and have heard God's call to serve and are living out the gospel. Many of the organizations that meet people's needs most effectively are church-based. For example, Lutheran Services in America. The organizations that are part of that group touch the lives of 1 in 50 Americans every year, more than any other service organization in the United States, including the Salvation Army and the Red Cross. So, people who sit in church, people like all of us who are gathered here, do transform lives. Now, we could do better. Of course we could. Of course. Of course. I mean, there's no debating about that. If we just sit in church and don't do anything else, then we are wasting our time. But the world is changed because we live out the great good news of Easter and the 4 commands that were given by the angel to the women on that first Easter morning. Did you notice what they were? Very simple. Come, see, go, tell. Come, see, go, tell. Let's look at those in the context of the story. The 2 women, the 2 Marys, come to the tomb on that Sunday morning. It's not as easy as it sounds. They have endured the horrible death of their friend and teacher Jesus the Friday before, and have seen his abused body placed in the tomb. So, they have been witnesses of the crucifixion, they have been witnesses of the burial, and they are witnesses of the resurrection. Let me make a little side comment here. In the first century, if someone's statement in a court-like setting was even going to be considered, there had to be 2 witnesses to it. And those 2 witnesses had to be men. Women weren't allowed to be witnesses. And so the fact that the women are the ones who are the first witnesses reminds us that Jesus did something radical. He opened up the boundaries of grace to all believers. And so the women come. And as they come to the tomb, things get a little bit shaky. Get it? There's an earthquake. There's an earthquake in the place where the body of Jesus has been laid. And they see this angel sitting on the rock, which appears now like a pebble that has just been tossed aside. Remember, this rock was placed in front of the tomb by the Jews who were afraid that a rumor would spread that Jesus had been raised. And so they intentionally put this rock there and sealed it, intending it to be there for eternity. And sitting on the rock, looking for all the world like it's sunning itself in the glory of God, which that's the image I get, is this angel. And the guards, who are there to make sure that nothing unplanned happens, are in a coma-like state. They have been scared to death. And so the irony is that Jesus, who is supposed to be dead, is alive, and the guards who are supposed to be guarding the tomb like dead men. That's what the women see. And they are beckoned by the angel to come and look in the tomb. And the stone has been removed, not to let Jesus out, but to let the women in. And then there's the two other commands. Go and tell. Once again, very astounding. Women not only are the first witnesses of the resurrection, they're the first preachers, the first proclaimers of the gospel. Another key to us that what's happening here is radical, a radical change, a radical transformation in the way things are going to be done in the world. And what they are to proclaim is not just that the tomb is empty, but that Jesus is alive and that they will see the risen Lord. Come, see, go tell. Well, we have come and we have seen through the proclamation of the gospel and the beautiful Easter music, which tells the story that Jesus is risen. And now it's our turn to go and tell. And hopefully we'll do a little bit better job of it than a Catholic seminarian that I read about, who was given the opportunity following a chapel service one day to give the sermon the next day. The dean came up to him and said, you know, when you're a priest, you're going to have to do things on the spur of the moment. So, tomorrow you're giving the homily in chapel. Well, the poor young man didn't know how to give a homily. I guess it had dawned on him to pray about it. Not that I say anything negative about our Catholic brothers, but this particular one stayed up all night, could not come up with a sermon, got up into the pulpit on that next day in chapel and said, do you know what I'm going to say? And all of his fellow seminarians shook their heads no. And he said, neither do I. The sermon is ended, go in peace. Well, the dean was a little annoyed. So he said, okay, tomorrow's your day. You have to do it tomorrow. You just have to. You can't get away with that. So once again, the young man is up all night. I guess maybe he forgot to pray again. His fellow seminarians knew he was up all night, and he hadn't come up with anything again. So he gets up in the pulpit and he says, do you know what I'm going to say? And all of his fellow seminarians nod their heads yes. And he says, good, there's no reason to repeat it. The sermon is over, go in peace. Well, now the dean is really angry, just annoyed like you wouldn't believe. And so he says, tomorrow, one more time, and if you don't give a sermon this time, we're going to have to reconsider your continuing here in the seminary. So the young man, you would think third time's the charm, but he's up all night. He's struggling, gets up in the pulpit the next day and says, do you know what I'm going to say? And half the people out there, half of his fellow seminarians nod their heads yes, but half of them shake their heads no. And he said, well, then those of you who do know, tell those of you who don't know. Amen, the sermon is ended, go in peace. So the dean comes up to him, puts his arm around him, and says, those of you who do know, tell those of you who don't know. Now that's a proclamation of the gospel. Well, that pretty much sums it up. Through our words, we proclaim through our actions, we bring hope and help and healing to the world because of that good news. And let me tell you, for that